Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yongwang Ren. I'm a PhD candidate from Penn State University. Today, my presentation is about the spillover effect of FEMA's community rating system. So the flooding is getting more frequent as well as more serious at the national level. So due to the climate change as well as the accumulation of population and wealth in flood-prone areas. So in response to this risk, to this challenge, two programs were operated by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, aka FEMA. They were established in different times. The first one is the National Flood Insurance Program, or NFIP, was established in 1970s, which provides access to primary flood insurance as well as in aiming at reducing comprehensive flood risk. Well, another one is the community rating system, which we will be looking at today. It encourages community to take better flood-prone flood management above the basic standard of the NFIP, as well as supporting the NFIP program. So communities join the CRS, they can take those CRS eligible activities and they earn CRS points from that. Those points are then converted to a CRS class, and people who live in those communities will have a different level of discount based on the CRS class their community have. So a lot of previous research looked at, focused on evaluating the effectiveness of the community rating system in terms of increasing insurance take-up as well as reducing flood damage. Another strand of research look at factors that affect the community's decision of joining CRS. However, most of those research look at the local effect of CRS within those communities. But considering the activities taken by those communities, there is a chance that those those activities may affect their non-CRS neighbors. And if there is this spillover effect, then the total benefit of the CRS program could be underestimated. So the research question of this paper is to look at whether the CRS program has a spillover effect on their non-CRS communities. In other words, do those non-CRS communities experience lower flood damage than those who don't? And if there is an effect, what's the channel of this effect? So I use data from different sources. The first one is CRS historical data. It provides a detailed annual variation of CRS points earned from different categories for each CRS community from 1998 to 2018. And for communities participated in CRS before that time, I use an NFIP community status book to determine which year they joined the CRS. I then use the NFIP community map extracted from National Flood Hazard layer as a base, and I identify those non-CRS communities that share part of their border line with at least one CRS communities in a given year, and define them as being treated or having a CRS neighbor. For the claims data, were from FEMA through FOIA request, and I also collected annual precipitation data as well as demographic data and aggregated that to community level as controls. I also, to control the flood size, I also conduct a flood frequency analysis using USGS station data following Lee 2021's method. It gives a community level annual flood size that's measured in flood reoccurrence interval. So here's table one is summary statistics. On average, there are about 28% of the non-CRS communities have at least one CRS neighbor. And another thing worth mentioning here is that the flood damage is very sparse, especially for 2012. That's mainly due to the Hurricane Sandy. The average flood damage is much higher than the rest of the years. So I start with a simple tree fixed factor model or difference indifference model where the dependent variable is total flood damage for community. And the neighbor here is a dummy variable equals to 1 if a non-CRS community start to have a CRS neighbor in a given year. XIT include all those control variables I mentioned before. Considering that those non-CRS communities start to have a CRS neighbor in different time, so we have a staggered treatment situation here. And because of that, the simple tree fix effect estimator could be biased because of heterogeneous treatment effect. So I estimate an event study style estimator proposed by Sun and Abraham, 2021. Here we have this DITL is an indicator equals to 1 if it's being L periods away from the treatment year. In addition to that, I also used another method proposed by Liu et al. 2022. They also deals with the similar problem of heterogeneous treatment effect, and they provide an either way to plotting those dynamic treatment effects. Table 2 shows the results from the tree fixed effect model. We have a negative but not so significant coefficient here after adding year and community fixed effect. One possible explanation is that the coefficient here could be biased. Another thing is that because the study period is very long, maybe on average there is no or really small spillover effect. So then I turned to the event study results using Sun and Abraham's method. I found a small treatment effect about around $0.5 million in 7 years after the treatment. This is the results using Liu et al. The word test here shows that the parallel trend assumption holds here. I found a similar pattern of the results that a few years after the treatment, we have a negative impact on the flood damage. So I didn't find a instant treatment effect right after the treatment. And I'll talk about the possible reasons later when we discuss about the potential mechanisms. What I did next is some robustness check. First, I tried a different way of defining neighbor. Instead of using a non-CRS community and a CRS community sharing border, I define having a CRS neighbor if the shortest distance between those two communities is 0. We have a similar small negative effect in year 6. The next thing I did is I tried different binning choices. In the results before I showed, I've been all those years that's 11 or further away from the treatment year. Here I tried bin those years in or further or 15 years further away from the treatment year, and I still find a 0.5 million less damage effect here. The next thing is I was trying to examine whether the results is driven by those really high damage years. So I simply dropped the observations from 2012, and run the regression. I saw similar results here. So then I checked whether there is heterogeneous treatment effect. So I estimated the equation 2 separately for those communities with total population and household income above and below the median value. I found a larger treatment effect for small community and community with low income. The next thing is I also did separate regression for those observations in SFHA and NSFHA, which is a special flood hazard area, showing the higher flood risk area and the lower flood risk area. As expected, the results is driven by those observations in special flood hazard area is because most of the policies as well as those flood risk mitigation activities are taking place in those areas. So next, I look at the potential mechanism. I have kind of two large hypotheses here. The first one, I call it information spillover, where you can see it as a indirect effect. I looked at the first the learning behavior of a household, as a lot of previous research shows that household may take information from different sources, such as being hit by a flood or the flood map. Plotted by FEMA. They use those information to update their belief on future flood risk. Here I see their neighbors joining CRS, similar to like being hit by a flood or like that, some kind of new information, whether that will be used by those households and update their belief and take actions to that, such as whether they're gonna purchase more or less for the insurance to protect themselves. So I didn't find a significant effect here on the policy take-up. So then I looked at the behavior at the higher level, the community or the local government. Research showed that the local government may learn from their neighbor community or governments and making policies according to that. I didn't find a good way to test that directly, but I tried to provide some evidence here. I used data I received from First Street Foundation. They compiled this a national level flood-related adaptation projects in the whole United States. But unfortunately, a lot of them don't have the information about which year they were built instead. So what I did is that I first dropped those observations with a clear year built in later than 2018. That's the data we use in this research. And then I used the rest of them and merged them into the data I used here only for 2018, by assuming those projects were built in or before 2018. And then I run a simple OLS and probably regression to see whether having a CRS neighbor have an impact on those local community taking more for these activities. So the results show that having a CRS neighbor increase the probability of having an adaptation project by about 12 or 17%. The second hypothesis is, I call it protection spillover, or you can see it as a direct effect. I looked at whether those activities taken by CRS communities have a direct impact on the flood damage of their neighbors. So I ran the estimated the terrific effect model by adding the total CRS points earned by those CRS communities into the equation. As you can see, some of them have a negative impact here, such as mapping and regulation or flood damage reduction activities, but nothing is significant. So to conclude, I found a significant short-term negative impact of having a CRS neighbor on the flood damage. This treatment effect is stronger for a smaller and low-income community, and is also driven by those observations or claims located in a special flood hazard area within a community. Two possible explanations is information and protection spillover, and I only found some evidence for the information spillover. It indicates that maybe the learning process mainly is taken at the community or local government level. Yeah, that's what I have today, and Any questions or comments are appreciated. Yeah. You mean just virtually or in terms of population? Oh, yeah. Usually the NFIB community or STRAS community is at, most time is at county level. Yeah, but sometimes it may cross the border of a county, so it's not completely like could be layover on a county. Yeah. I'm not sure about the details of their decision process, but I'm assuming that it's made by the the government of that's running county government, and I think it should be going the process of voting or something before that, similar to other policy making process at county level. Yeah, I think the main cost here is associated with those activities they take. So we have 4 main categories like public information. Those 4 listed here. They have a lot of activities within each category. For example, for public information, one example is that if the local government could or the community could put some flood risk map made by FEMA in their like their county library that's accessed to the public, they can earn points from that. Well, that's example with really low cost, but the result is that you don't earn too many points from that. Yeah, but there are some higher level, higher costs with those activities, such as mapping and regulations. The mapping including they keep track of their or they make better flood risk maps locally and send those information, updated information to FEMA like that. And the regulation, one example is that they could make some policy or standards for those new built houses or new buildings. Yeah, and those buildings need to like make some elevations of their floors like that. There's a higher cost associated to those activities. Yeah.
So like in terms of mitigation, potential regulation.
Yes.
Through the channel that you suggest, they also teach them. I wonder if they already take some efforts or one like the programs so that they are also resident longer training.
Yeah, I guess that's related to the last question you asked, whether the cost of joining the program, right? I think that there are some other, we call it management costs or like that. If you join the program, you need to be, if you join the program first, you need to be evaluated. They'll send a representative from FEMA, and they evaluating what activities this community have to take, and they give you points and all those points give you points and class. And after that, you could take more activities. So you need more investment to that. So to get a higher CRS class and a higher discount. So yeah.
Is there variation in CRS? But is there a range? Is there CRS range?
Yeah. Yes, actually, I thought about that problem, like not only look at the binary treatment effect, but also how they call that the intensity of the treatment, like that. So there is different ranking of the CRS communities. The lower risk one is class 9, and people in those communities will have 5% discount when they purchase solar insurance. The highest one is class 1. They will earn as high as 45% discount, but there are not so many communities there. Most of them are within the range to from class 7 to class 9 in this part. But I will try to look at that later if there is different treatment effect based on those CRS rankings.
Did you have any thoughts about the recent flooding? I guess
wait, what the question is?
do you have any thoughts about the recent flooding in eastern Kentucky?
Mm-hmm.
Particularly interested in the counties.
Oh, yeah, actually don't know the flooding happened there, but I'm sure there is communities in Kentucky participating in the program. One thing I want to mention here is that there's a similar like geospatial pattern from the CRS to the FIB program. A lot of the policies are located in those coastal areas such as Florida, Texas, California, New York, Georgia, something like that, Louisiana, like that. But there's some kind of participants in those inner land states. So I think there are some communities participating in Kentucky too. Yeah.
I do have 2 questions. So maybe on the side of that is the Western steps that focus on non-coastal areas.
Yeah.
I think maybe you touched on these to talk about the mechanisms. When I was thinking, is it more likely that I will become CRS number for this?
Oh, yeah.
And some of these reductions are not homeowner, but I've started to make investments.
Yeah.
And 2, and this might be looking up on the slide now, is how much protection do I get downstream of CRS community? So they've done analysis about this connections, retention ponds, things like that. So a general flood in the area is just not going to much because I can upstream.
Yeah. So in terms of the first question, I could look at the heterogeneous effect on coastal or non-coastal areas. And the second part of that question is whether your neighbor joined the CRS increase your probability of, yeah. I thought about that too. I found a research by, I don't remember the name, but they did a paper on that and they found there's no significant impact if your neighbor joined the CRS. But I think I could try to do the similar analysis using the data I have to here, just show it in the results. And the second question, what, sorry, what's this?
Yeah, it was, am I just getting downstream?
Oh, yeah. I see that. Yeah, I discussed that with also get a suggestion from my committee and advisors too. I haven't did that, but I'm trying to add those upstream, downstream relationship using the data from what's that, EPA, where they have those river data, national river data, and I think I could use that to define the neighbor relationship more conservatively, so that only non-CRS community is located downstream of a CRS community, and define the map neighbor and see whether the effect is significant there or like that. Yeah, good suggestion. Thank you. Yeah, sure.
People are all informed about the risk, also know more about the CRS program. They might choose different counties where they join the program so that they can join the county. There were 5 members that county. So sorting, that's more of people than moving counties that do not get into the program. And then as a result, because of more damage, measure like insurance, right? And, you know, because the measuring, because of the sorting, then counties get less people, well, it didn't quite. But maybe then that's informed, that's like, right?
Yeah, thank you. I did think that before when I took another courses, like in the second year. I think someone did an agent-based model. They look at whether the impact of flood insurance on property value, something like that. And they look at whether people are making their location decisions based on whether those community are in FIDs, then you are eligible to purchase flood insurance there or not. So what I thought before then was, what about the role of the CRS here? Is it possible that people also considering moving to a CRS community just because they have a higher discount on the flood insurance? But I don't know if there is any ongoing research on that yet. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh. Okay, there we go. Oh, but I don't want it to open in Edge. Yeah, no, but I just wanted it to not open in, oh well. Okay. There we go. Okay, no, I don't want that. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Sébastien Box-Couillard. I'm a third-year PhD student at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And this is a paper I'm working on with Ilan called The Effect of Flood Insurance on Property Values After a Flood. Okay, so, I mean, we all know flooding is a big natural disaster. It's the most financially damaging natural disaster rate in the US. And so we hear a lot about direct damages, so damage to properties, things like that. But in addition to that, there's also there's been found to be fairly significant effect on housing values after flood. So flood hits an area and the homes in that area lose value. So normally in the literature so far, what they've found is a 2 to 10% decrease in housing values. So this impact of floods, we try to conceptualize it in a couple different ways. So one way it can be is new risk information. So a flood hits your area and you're like, oh, wow, I actually live in a riskier area. Or people who are thinking of buying a house in that area are like, whoa, this is a risky area. So in that case, it's not clear that flood insurance would have an effect, right, on risk perceptions anyway. And then this other mechanism is through property damage. So a bunch of properties are damaged in a given area. The area sort of looks like it's in disrepair. And then in that case, if areas are able to rebuild faster or better, then there's a role sort of for insurance in mitigating this decrease in housing prices. And there is evidence, so this McCoy and Zhao paper shows that people who have flood insurance tend to also rebuild their homes faster and are also more likely to rebuild their homes if they're flooded. The other piece of evidence is that in almost all these studies, the housing price drop is temporary. So you very rarely, or actually in the literature, there is no housing price drop that's just like, that lasts forever. So the idea here is that what is the role of, so what we're trying to look at, what is the role of flood insurance, right, in protecting housing values after a flood. We're going to look at a case study, which is Hurricane Harvey. And we're going to look at neighborhood zip code, which is a bit more than a neighborhood, but we're going to look at a zip code level flood insurance take up as our treatment. But the challenge here, right, is flood insurance is going to be endogenous. So I'll talk a bit about that a little bit more in detail later, but we're going to use the insurance of your unflooded social peers as an IV. And just to preview our findings, we find that in sort of moderately flooded zip codes, so if you increase your flood insurance take up from, if you lived in the 25th versus the 75th percentile of take up, that would mitigate about almost half of the loss in property values that is experienced from flooding. So we contribute in various ways. First of all, to my knowledge, this is the first study that actually tries to quantify the effect of flood insurance on post-flood property values. We provide evidence of the protective effect of flood insurance, which, I mean, it seems obvious that flood insurance would have a protective effect, but we sort of are providing evidence. We add to the literature on this growing literature on evaluating the effectiveness of disaster assistance programs. And we also add to just the general literature on flood insurance and housing price responses to natural disasters. So our empirical framework, so this sample right now is from August 2015 to December 2018, and Hurricane Harvey hit in August 2017. However, I just got new data that will allow us to expand the sample, but for the sake of this presentation, this is what you're going to see. And we take transactions within a zip code that experienced at least some level of flooding, so at least a little bit of flooding, which is really a lot of zip codes in this area. I'll show you a map later on. The treatment here is going to be your average flood insurance take up. So this take up rate would be the number of single family flood insurance policies divided by the number of single family households in a given zip code. And we're going to take the average in the year prior to Hurricane Harvey of that measure, of that take up measure. And again, I'll talk about the instrument a little bit later in more detail. And we're going to do heterogeneous treatment effects by the average zip code flood depth as well. So this is the empirical framework. Basically what we should concentrate on here is, so this coefficient, so first of all, our dependent variable, right, is the log of the price of home I at time t in zip code z. But the coefficient of interest here that we're focusing on is this beta 6k, which is the effect of flood insurance on housing prices, dependent on the level of flooding experienced in your zip code. We also have an extensive list of controls that I didn't include here, but we have things that like distance to the shore, distance to the nearest water body, also the classic sort of hedonic controls as well. And we cluster our standard errors at the zip code level. So, okay, endogenate. So flood insurance is likely to be endogenous to your housing price. first of all, the decision to insure, right, is not a random decision. Second of all, insurance, if you purchase insurance, you're likely to be more aware of your risk and hence possibly discount your housing price because of that, versus someone who hasn't purchased insurance may not be aware of the risk. So that's another issue. And finally, flood insurance is likely to be highly correlated, right, with your ability to recover from a disaster. And so is the price of your house just because you're wealthier, etc. So what we decide to do here is we're instrumenting the average take-up with the average take-up in your unaffected social peers zip codes. So what we do is basically we take the take-up, we take a weighted average of take-up in all unaffected zip codes, and we weight it by the social connections between your zip code and those zip codes. So the first stage of this is motivated really by this Gallagher paper and this WHO paper. So in the Gallagher paper, they show that if you're in the same DMA, the same media market, but you were not flooded, right? Hearing about your social peers flooding, that increases your flood insurance, the number of flood insurance policies in your area. And this WHO paper actually shows that more socially connected areas, he also uses the SCI, he shows that more socially connected areas have similar responses in terms of flood insurance take-up after a flood hits, even if you yourself were not affected. And so that's the motive, that's the idea behind the first stage. And then the exclusion restriction, right, here would be satisfied if flood insurance take-up in unaffected areas doesn't directly influence your housing prices. So the housing prices in your affected zip codes. So the data we use, so right now, so for this presentation, again, we have Zillow's that tracks housing data. However, so Texas is a non-disclosure state, which means that we don't actually have housing prices in Texas. We have loan amounts, which is not exactly the same thing. So first of all, it's only people who have mortgages. Second of all, it's basically the amount of your mortgage. So, but we just like 2 weeks ago got data from CoreLogic that we actually have housing prices, but that's not what I'm presenting today because 2 weeks is not a huge amount of time to get these results again. Take these results with a bit of a grain of salt because these are not the final results. However, it seems like a decent enough start. We also have National Flood Insurance Program policies that has been talked about before. We have flood depths, which we aggregate to the zip code level, demographics. We also have HMDA data to try to look at a little bit, some mechanisms a little bit as well. Okay, so this is a map of areas that were flooded by Hurricane Harvey. And so a few things to notice. So all these zip codes, all these sort of polygons are zip codes, okay? And they're all the zip codes in our sample. And what you see here is, so the darker red areas are the areas where the flood depths are larger. And what's interesting to note is that, so one would expect that areas actually very close to the coast would be the most flooded, but that's not necessary. So there is more flooding in terms of area, but in terms of depth, the most severely flooded areas are actually further from the coast, which is something which is interesting. And if we relate that to this map, which is flood insurance take up in this area, so same zip codes again. So the most insured zip codes are the ones right next to the coast, actually. So there's sort of there's already something interesting going on here in terms of this disparity between the level of flooding and actually where people are insured. So that's sort of just to set up the problem. Yes? Yeah, so if you live in a special flood hazard area, so 100-year, what's also called a 100-year flood zone, if you have a mortgage on your house, then you are supposed to buy flood insurance. The level of enforcement has been shown to not be perfect for that. So there are people who have mortgages and don't have flood insurance and live in flood, but in general, take up is much higher in those areas that are within, yeah. So that's a good question, actually. I actually am not sure who would enforce that. Yeah, but that's a good question. I want to find that out. Yeah. I mean, non-mortgage houses, you're not required to get it. So even if you're in the 100-year flood zone, if you don't have a mortgage, then you do not need to have it. Yeah. So that, yeah, yes. Very backed mortgage, yeah. Mhm. Yeah, so I'm trying to remember. I think I might actually have it at the very, let me just check my appendix. Yeah, so of all the houses in this sample, well, this is just, okay, this is sorted by take up. So this is not exactly the absolute number, but so depending on, so in above median take up areas, 11% of houses are in a flood zone, and below median take up areas, 3% of houses are in the flood zone. So that's, yeah, anyway. Okay. So now so this slide now, so this is ignoring, so let's forget about flood insurance for this one slide. Now we're just trying to see if the results on housing prices are the same as these previous studies that show like a 2 to 10% drop. So what we see here is, so this is compared to, so these results, so the omitted category here is depth quartile 1, so the least flooded zip codes. And what we see is that in these more flooded zip codes, right, after Hurricane Harvey hits, there's a 3 to 5% decrease in housing values. So that's right in the middle of those previous estimates. And so one thing that's interesting, but that decrease is not significant in the very most flooded areas, which is something we're trying to work through and understand why that would be the case. Okay, so that's our first result. Now, let's incorporate flood insurance into this. Okay, so these results, so the IV results are the second column here. And what we see, so like, let's say we're interpreting this result here. So that this would mean that a 1 percentage point increase in flood insurance take up in your zip code leads to a 0.26% increase in housing prices after Hurricane Harvey. Okay, so that seems quite small. However, yes. Yeah. This is the take up rate in the year before the hurricane. Yeah. Okay, yeah, so there's that. So this may seem like a fairly small effect. However, if we try to contextualize it a little bit, so if you live in the 25th percentile of flood insurance take up in this depth quartile 2, that's 15%. Okay, the 75th percentile is about 34%, and the average house price in this quartile is about 208,000. Okay. So if we multiply the difference between these two quartiles and the average flood price and coefficient, so that gives us an increase of about $11,000. Okay. Now, if we look at these results again, now we see, okay, after the flood, that was in these areas, partially up function, like the value increased by 11%. Okay. So that 11% decrease, 11% of 200,000 is about 22,000. Okay, so that's mitigating, this 11,000 is mitigating about half of that, right? So that's, I mean, this is obviously a large increase, right? 15 to 33%, but at the same time, it doesn't make sense to look at just a 1 percentage point increase necessarily in terms of trying to wrap our minds about what these results mean. So we tried then to look at a little bit of mechanisms. We're just starting this. So first we're trying to look at, trying to find the supply and demand. So we have these, this HMDA data on mortgage applications, originations, and the origination rate. So applications and originations both drop in more flooded areas, but take-up doesn't seem to have much of an impact here. However, there is a positive impact on the origination rate. So that would, if we take that at its face value, would mean that banks are more willing to lend to these better insured areas after a disaster. So we're trying to work through that, what that would mean, or is this even interesting? So that's one mechanism we're looking at. And another sort of more basic thing is just looking at transactions. Okay, so this is the dependent variable here is the number of transactions per month. So after Hurricane Harvey, transactions fall. They don't fall more in more flooded areas. And also there's no real effect based on take up as well. So it doesn't seem to be a transaction or demand type, or but it's, again, it's hard to sort of disentangle supply and demand when you're just thinking of overall transactions. So the next step is that we're going to have this CoreLogic data. And in the CoreLogic data, you have things like days on market that will help us untangle demand and supply effects. We're going to have a larger time frame and a larger sample. We're going to be able to look at renovations and remodeling. So another possibility here is that people who get flood insurance, there is anecdotal evidence anyway that they use that money to remodel their homes and then they can sell those at a higher price than before. So I'm looking at that. There's also realtor comments, and I was actually just looking at this interestingly in the last week, and there were some comments that I was reading which said like unaffected by Hurricane Harvey, not in a flooded area, you know, right there in the description. So doing some text analysis on that will be interesting as well. So those are the next steps. And so just to conclude, so it seems as though from our preliminary results here that flood insurance seems to have at least some protective effect on property values following a large flood. And these findings are consistent with the literature that shows that aid, national disaster aid, has a large positive impacts on recipients. And so if these turn out to be true, more should be done to promote access to flood insurance, especially in disadvantaged communities. Because, I mean, currently, if this is true, and we also, there are previous studies that show that wealthier, more educated people are more likely to have flood insurance, then this is just exacerbating those inequalities, really, if those neighborhoods are also able to recover more through flood insurance. So that's what I had for today. I'm happy to take questions and comments. It'd be very helpful. Yes, you had your hand up.
Yes.
Mm.
Insurance sets up and higher
Mm. That's true. That's true. Yeah, so for the first question, I do have claims data, so I have to do that. I'll do it. And then the second question, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, so that's, I'm taking note of that now. Yeah, maybe amend this sentence. Yes. Oh, so, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But my second one, it seems like you can take the depth of the flooding and put it at the zip code level.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a location of transactions that allows you to exploit who is actually flooded, who wasn't.
Yeah.
Which should, along with those claims data, try and tease out, is it something these people that sign up are doing differently?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it something else going on to the actual damage? You know, insurance, your house should sell more than the other group in which some people fix it, others just have to follow.
Yeah, so that's so yeah, the omit 100-year flood, I'll try that. And then yeah, so the depth, so the thing we were thinking about this with the depth, so we could actually get the depth at the level of your house, but we don't know which houses actually have insurance. We just know the because we don't have addresses in that, we just have the zip code and that part. So to basically to avoid confusion, I did both at the zip code level, but I could do that But it would just be for the flood depth. I don't actually know which actual houses have. So that's only at the zip code level, unfortunately. But that would be amazing if that was possible. If I had the addresses of the people, actual people who had the flood insurance. Yeah. So, but thank you. That's true. That's true. I didn't mention that. That's in this long list of controls, but I do have a I do have a control for whether your house yourself, you yourself were flooded. I do have a control for that. That's a good point. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I should have mentioned that, but I won't. Yeah.
Sorry to keep going.
No.
The claims data
Yeah.
and who's flooded should be only make a claim.
Yes, but the claims data is also at the just aggregate at the zip code level. Yeah. Yeah. You had a question earlier.
It's about the flood depths.
Yes.
So I was just wondering, what's the difference between those different projects?
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head, but I mean the first quartile is like below 1.5 feet or something like that, I want to say, but I don't remember exactly the numbers. And I know that the largest, the fourth quartile is something pretty big, but I also don't remember exactly the numbers. But yeah.
Wondering, like, about the number of population.
Well, I mean, there's the same number of observations in each. Yeah. So, but yeah. Yeah. Sorry, behind and then. Yeah. I mean, that's basically what I was trying to say here. I don't know if that, you mean at an aggregate level or at like. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's a bit, I mean, it's because, yeah, it's also, it depends on like what you're assuming is the like, because, so these results are for a 1 percentage point increase, which is, I mean, in terms of context, like, I just don't know how relevant it is to just do that. So you have to assume some type of other, so that, yeah, but I'll think about that a little bit more. Thank you. Yes. No, they don't have to do, no. So yeah, so if you get, as an individual, if you want flood insurance, wherever you live in the US, you're supposed to be able to get it without the community needing to do anything. But yeah, if you want a discount, then you need to be in the CRS. Yeah. And also there are different things. So like, for example, there are some policies that I think something like if your house was built before 1975, or so there's something about grandfathering where you don't pay the full premium, and there are many conditions in which you wouldn't actually pay the actuarially fair premium. So that has, so in places where there are a lot of older homes, there's also, so there's cheaper flood insurance in those areas. But, yeah.
But that's certain degree.
very interesting issue.
Mhm.
So much, but I worked
In,
kind of get a book about insurance, actually get their own money. Sorry, we get insurance for the water system. My guess is most of the homes that were just recently changed are.
yeah, that's, yeah, yeah, that's, mhm.
My guess is if we look better, throw on the headwaters, yes, I'm not sure that. We get flash floods. on
Yeah.
these headwater areas.
Yeah. That's right.
That's exactly just-
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Match this. No, it's not my news. Okay. And well, how can I? Sebastian, what's the trick? Oh, here, right? Okay. All right, so this is another paper about flood insurance. This is a paper that I work with Yi Huang at Nanjing Audit University. So the question we are trying to answer is, does climate change news inform flood insurance take-up? So this, I think for those who are interested in this issue, it's very well known that flood insurance is the most prevalent natural disaster in the United States. It happens in 90% of the natural disasters in the United States, and technically 90% of the counties in the U.S. ever experience a flood event. And it's also very costly. Here is showing the damage from flood disasters comparing to all natural disasters, and it's growing in its magnitude in more recent years. However, if you look at the flood insurance take-up rate, it's very low, even for those major hurricane flooding events. Only between 20 to 40% of the victims have flood insurance for their properties. So then the question is, why is that? How can we fix it, right? So one of the explanations is the misperception of risk. 40% of those people who are living in the high flood risk area do not at all worry about flood risk. And 60 to 70% underestimate their flood risk. So then how can we fix it? How do people learn about flood risk? The literature has shown that people can learn from their own experience. So after a flood event, the flood insurance take-up rate would increase, the housing price would decrease in the local area. People can also learn from public information, right? If there's a change in the flood zone map, then people also react to that. And then there's another paper by myself and Sebastian showing that people can also learn from their social peers flood experiences. And as a response, they increase their flood insurance purchase. And then we ask a different question. Can news media help? The idea being that for most people, the public, the mass media is the major channel for them to receive any information about the climate change. Not many people would then directly learn from the textbook that is happening, but they learn from the media. And then, of course, there's also partisan bias regarding this specific topic, right? Because climate change is very politicalized and polarized and all that. And then there's this paper that shows that actually news is very informative. In this paper, they construct a measure of news coverage about climate change, and these finance people try to construct portfolios that move in the opposite direction. When there are more climate change related news coverage, this portfolio would then gain, increase in its price. Then they try to use this kind of portfolio to do short-term hedging for long-term climate risk. And in this paper, we are following their method to construct time series of media coverage about climate change. And we are trying to see whether they are making an impact in households' flood insurance decisions. We study whether and how climate change news coverage would affect flood insurance purchase. And then we also try to understand the interplay of political ideology and partisan coverage. In particular, we look at two news sources. One is the New York Times, which is more Democrat-leaning news outlet. And then we also look at Wall Street Journal, which is Republican-leaning news outlet. Our basic hypothesis is that, depending on your own ideology, you might interpret the news differently, depending on whether the newspaper has the same ideology as yours or not. But we actually encounter some difficulty in that, as I will explain later. And then in terms of the data source that we are using, the National Flood Insurance Program policy is very much like what Sebastian is telling you guys. We basically here aggregate the policy level information to the county month level. So for each county, we count how many policies are in force in this particular month. And our sample covers between 2010 and 2015. And then we look at the news coverage in New York Times and Wall Street Journal from the ProQuest database. During the same period, we use some keyword search, not just climate change, global warming, but some other key terms to search both in the title and the content of each news articles. And then if they mention any of these keywords, we get a count of 1, and then we aggregate up to the month level. Notice that there's no county variation in this sense because we are looking at national news outlets. However, our outcome variable is at the county level. And then we also have a whole bunch of control variables that we are using. Just to give you some idea, the dependent variable we are using is actually the first difference in the log of number of policies in force. The interpretation is the change in the growth rates in the flood insurance take-up from month to month. And the way we define a policy in force is that if a policy took effect before the beginning of next month and ends after the end of this month, then it's in effect in this month. So that is how we count the number of policies in force. We also control for the premium because of the price elasticity. We also control for flood-related disaster declaration in the past 6 months in Owen County, and then the residual of the national level disaster declaration. We take the first order auto regression residual because that's sort of the unexpected part. We also control for the precipitation. We define a dummy as the severe extremely wet weather if the monthly average precip is larger than 1.5 standard deviation from a long term, I don't remember, 10 years or 15 years of average standard deviation. And then we also do the month-over-month growth in local employment rate as a control. In terms of our explanatory variable, in each month we count the number of climate change related news articles divided by the number of total articles. Actually, the number of total articles published every month is fairly stable. But still, we try to normalize it by, taking this ratio. And we are running a AR1 process and only keep the residual because that's the unexpected change in the coverage. Here we are making this assumption that people are rational enough to form this expectation of how many news articles, how many climate change related news articles they should expect. But then they only respond if something happened out of their expectation. We also scale this tiny residual term by 1,000 so that our so that our estimates would be easy to interpret. So the upper panel shows you the raw data in terms of the share of coverage. So you can see that basically on average is about 1 or 2% of the news articles in each newspaper would have climate change related articles. You can see that there's a slight increase towards the end of the sample. Another observation is that these two time trends actually track each other very closely, and that's creating some complication for us. And the lower panel is giving you this residual term. So it bounces around 0, and it has a lot of fluctuations going on. And that's the beauty of this unexpected part, right? So that's giving us some variation that we can explore. And this is a panel fixed effect model, simple, straightforward. So on the left-hand side is the month-to-month change in the growth rate. And then our achievement dummy is basically the share of news coverage in each media. And then we control for a whole bunch of local time varying conditions and also the county fixed effect, and the standard error is plastered at the county level. Our simple hypothesis here is that if people really learn from news media, then this beta coefficient should be just positive. Here's the summary statistics. We have the total sample about 3,000 counties, and then we have a panel of a certain number of years. We also split the counties into the coastal and non-coastal counties. We want to see whether people learn differently. Here, our basic hypothesis is that those in the non-coastal area should learn more from the news because, flood risk is not natural to them that they are less aware of compared to people who are on the coastal area. So this is new news to them, and they should learn, and they should, respond more, to a greater degree. So here I'm showing the baseline regression results in 2 panels. In panel A, we are looking at New York Times climate change news coverage. And you can see that the coefficient in the first column is positive and significant. When we split the sample into non-coastal and coastal, it's really showing up in the non-coastal area because of the new news effect. If you look at Wall Street Journal, it's basically the same pattern, but smaller magnitude. Now, what's interesting is that when we put the 2 of them together in the first column, you'll see that only New York Times survive. And Wall Street Journal, which had a smaller coefficient to begin with when it's standing alone, is now no longer significant. Our interpretation here is that, as I show you in the time frame, they are tracking each other very closely. So just bear in your mind that we are only counting the counts, right? the share of news articles covering this particular topic. And we suspect that they are actually covering the same underlying source of events. Now, if there's a flood happening, they all report that. If there's a certain regulation related to climate change that passed the regulation, they all report the same thing. So they happen to have the same kind of movements. And that is why when we throw both of them in, only one survived. But in terms of cognitive bias, this is actually good news because people were able to detect the correlated news source, and they are able to neglect the repeated information, only focus on one. And then when we split the sample by the flood risk at county level, we see this Columbia University level of flood risk in 3 levels. We see that the biggest reaction also comes in the low risk area. Again, this is a new news effect that we try to interpret. And then the next question is, do people respond differently because of their demographic information or characteristics? It has been shown in the literature that those who are more educated, receiving higher income and having more property value in stake are more likely to buy insurance, right? So here we are trying to see whether they also learn differently from the climate change news. And here you can see that it's only for the sky groups that are having positive and significant estimates, except for the income, but also 10% significant for the lower group. But actually, they are not statistically different if you also account for the confidence interval. Something else I also want to point out, which might be to your surprise, is that the mean of y, which is the flood insurance growth rate, is actually higher across board for the low group. Why? We were trying to understand that. And it's actually because they had a very low insurance rate to start with. It's not rare that they only have 1 or 2 insurance in place to begin with. And then once you move from 1 insurance to 2 insurance, the increase rate is like 100%, right? So the distribution of the growth rate is more dispersed for the low groups, which makes it hard to get a precise estimation. So that's our interpretation there. Actually, the high group is only the high 10%. High is the quintile in our county sample. So you see, now the next thing we are trying to do is to understand this partisan bias, whether it will show up, right? So now instead of coding the news as Wall Street Journal versus New York Times, we call them as aligned or not aligned. So for each party, we know their presidential election results. We know whether they are, Democrat counties or Republican counties, and then we then code, say for example for Democrats, then we code New York Times as aligned, Wall Street Journal as non-aligned, and then the other way around for the Republicans. We would expect that they would react to the news differently, but here we are not finding consistent results. Like for Republicans, they actually react negatively to their aligned news source and react positively to the non-aligned news source, which is somehow surprising. And then for Democrats, they seem to respond to both in a positive way, meaning that they increase, increase the growth in the flood insurance take-up. And actually, if you just see by their belief of climate change happening using the Yale Climate Belief Survey, then you see a similar pattern. Low belief, or presumably those that are, those Republican counties, they also have this similar pattern that they react negatively to their aligned news source, and positively to the non-aligned news source. So our conjecture here is that maybe the count is not a good measure to understand the partisanship bias. Maybe it's really the underlying content that's matter. Different news can frame the same topic differently, right? Even if there's a big flood happening somewhere, traditionally the Democrat-leaning news outlet would then focusing on reporting, say, the damage, how bad it is, people should take action. But then the Republican-leaning, news outlets would report differently, and there's this, dog whistle effect that's playing a role here. That maybe the Republican counties would only respond to certain type of message in this news. So that opens the door for future research. So now I'm just showing you the very preliminary results here. So overall, we show this baseline pattern that unexpected change or unexpected increase in the climate change related news coverage will increase the growth rate of flood insurance take up. We also see this new news effects that in places that are not naturally aware of the flood risk would learn the most from the news. And then we also find that, people can detect the correlated information and ignore, not to overreact to both, news that are reporting the same thing. We find mixed results about the partisanship bias, but I think that would open the door for future research about framing. That would involve some test analysis of the actual news article to understand what's going on. We can also use the sentiment. Maybe, they reported, maybe the Democrats leaning news outlet would report it more negatively or more positively, and that would give us more information. And then we can also look at the cancer margin instead of looking at the growth in the ticker rate, but maybe in the coverage of those insurance that people are buying. And then finally, the very important extension would be to look at the interplay between the traditional news outlets and social media. And very likely, they are also reporting the same thing. Right? On social media, people are really talking about what's in the traditional news media, and is there a way we can handle this, and or is it like a resonance effect? That I think those are interesting research topics. So yeah, if we can successfully understand the role of political ideology in this process, then maybe there's a role that we can play to try to close the belief gap by, structuring our news about climate change in a certain way that people can respond positively. So that's it for my presentation. I can take questions. Yes.
Thanks for a great talk. With my
So you are thinking, including climate disasters as the keyword. Oh, you are thinking of restricting it to flood related. I see. Yeah, okay. Yeah, originally we want to make it more general about the perception, but you are thinking because outcome variable is flood insurance, so we should narrow it down. Okay. Yeah, that might be the case. It's worthwhile to try a robustness check. But just to give you some idea, the climate change coverage, climate change news coverage is about 1 or 2%. And if we look at flood, it's even smaller. But yeah, I guess because we are using the intertemporal change, they might still be something we can do about. Yeah. Yeah, we are at the monthly level. And we also don't want to expand our sample too long because then we will enter a period of frequent floods that will complicate the model certification, because my other paper shows that people learn from other people, from their social peers, flood experience and so on and so forth. So we want to keep it as simple as, you know, possible. Yeah.
I was thinking it's similarly, like, so for example, I feel it's possible that New York Times article would have to keep climate change linked to natural disasters. But Wall Street Journal may not, they may just report on the natural disaster itself.
Yes.
not say
Yeah.
not make those things.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
Not using the last part.
yeah, so like, there could be something there. So like one way to look at that would be to restrict it just to articles about natural disasters. And within that, maybe a lot of variation, but there are also journal mentions. Maybe that's sorry, earlier. Thinking when it comes to insurance, disaster insurance, flooding is actually the biggest, almost occurrence of natural disaster. I think there's a case to be that changes in flood insurance. What might have the question is, I don't know if we about climate change as a new I want to know what's the basis for humans in Indiana that people like having a concern about climate change as a news that's what they say to me. You know, when you run that under the people's New York Times as various and it seems to be without pointing. The other way also, is there an explanation for why that causal relationship was from New York Times?
Yeah.
Because the previous results showed.
Yeah. This is also a small story. New York Times. And then when they are together, then Wall Street Journal is attenuated.
So it just maybe like.
Yeah, maybe more. Yeah, more investigation to go. Other questions? Yes. It's very high, right? Yeah, I mean, just eyeballing as I try, and you see that, right? Yeah. So that is why we think maybe the friend is more important.
In terms of the partnership bias, and I think everybody about the data, I mean, does that cause a passive interaction? So it's like that copies that live in that interactions, they were so that identified afterwards become the public. Yeah, there's a paper again on quotes from
2012, but yeah, I think that would be an interesting way. Yeah, currently we are looking at the margin. So, you know, pure in terms of pure votes for Democrats versus for Republicans, if one is higher, then we define them as that for that party. But they do not necessarily win that county because there could be some other parties. But yeah, I think
probably very similar.
Yeah, close to it, right? Yeah.
Or which may raise the question whether you want to make that a limitation. So a lot of counties, well, similar amounts of that. That's what elections are doing. So some counties might be press does that, you know, that's a variation.
Yeah. Yes, we do notice that when, yeah, there's certain election patterns that I don't remember. But yes, that,
Yeah, I'm just wondering, you mentioned that most of the media are publicly available, etc.
yes, we are only using the national variation.
So, I mean, everybody can just read the articles and go into subscribers.
Oh, no, that's not actually the case. Yeah, so in that sense, they could be geographic variation in terms of the subscription rate. We don't have to measure for that.
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether there's a difference between like rural or non-rural areas or
But basic pattern for the news industry in the United States is that most of the local news have been acquired by national companies. So eventually they are all reporting the same thing but in different ways. And yeah, in that sense, this substance of not measure what's going on inside. But yeah, part of the shift difference might only show up in the content of the
You know, like, sure, or understanding carries the information. Because if you think about election qualification, that's our information that's required. Use a part of it. It was difficult. And you know, the college was so I'm curious. And but then when I make sure agents are here.
yeah, this gets very complicated. Try to think about the underlying belief update process. Again, it's a heuristic, it's a short report, but forgetting and all, it gets really messy.
So I think there was one thing covered. Like
Content. Okay. Yeah.
that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, currently we take the crown, so the effect is part of the but let's say that when you get free, the content also changes and structure. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's something. Yeah. Thank you so much. This is the presenting, and I really like it. Very useful. And thank everyone for taking this session and have this wonderful